February in Chicago means everyone's desperate for affordable housing before spring semester starts, which explains how I ended up sharing a 2-bedroom in Logan Square with Natalie. She'd been living there for 3 years already, needed someone to split the rent after her previous roommate got married, and during our first meeting at a coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue, she seemed perfect. Soft-spoken, worked as a librarian at Northwestern, wore these delicate pearl earrings that reminded me of my grandmother's, and actually offered to take the smaller bedroom since she'd already been paying less. She even brought homemade lemon bars to our meeting, wrapped in parchment paper with a little ribbon. When she mentioned she liked keeping things tidy and preferred quiet evenings, I practically signed the lease right there in the cafe. After 6 months of couch surfing post-breakup, finding someone who valued cleanliness and calm felt like winning the lottery. Moving day went smoother than any roommate situation I'd experienced since college in 2008. Natalie had already cleared out half the kitchen cabinets, labeled them with my name on cute washi tape, and even left a welcome basket on my bed with local takeout menus, a succulent in a hand-painted pot, and a handwritten note about the quirks of the apartment. The radiator in my room clanged at night but worked perfectly. The bathroom door stuck if you didn't lift while closing, and the neighbors upstairs had a beagle named Winston who barked exactly twice every morning at 7. She helped me carry boxes without being asked, made us both green tea when we took a break, and spoke in this gentle voice that never rose above what you'd use in a library. That first week I kept waiting for the catch, for some awful habit to reveal itself. But everything stayed pleasant. We developed an easy routine where she'd make coffee in the mornings while I handled dinner prep, and we'd chat about books or her weird patron stories while cooking. Everything changed on a Thursday night in March, exactly 5 weeks after I'd moved in. I'd been rushing to finish a presentation for work and left my cereal bowl in the sink, planning to wash it after my video call ended. The meeting ran long, almost 2 hours of budget discussions and timeline adjustments, and I honestly forgot about the bowl sitting there with milk residue slowly drying into concrete. When I finally emerged from my room around 8, Natalie stood at the kitchen counter holding a glass of water, staring at that bowl like it had personally insulted her entire family line. Her knuckles went white around the glass, and before I could even apologize, she raised it above her head and slammed it down against the granite counter with this guttural scream that came from somewhere deep in her chest. Glass exploded everywhere, tiny shards catching the overhead light like demented snow, and a piece caught her palm, drawing a thin line of blood that dripped onto the floor. The silence after felt louder than the crash itself. Natalie stood there, examining her bleeding hand with this detached curiosity, like she'd never seen blood before. Then she looked up at me, and her face had already shifted back to that serene expression she always wore, except now blood was pooling in her cupped palm and glass crunched under her slippers as she moved. "I'm so sorry about that," she said in her library voice, grabbing a dish towel to wrap her hand. "Sometimes things just need to break, you understand? Like pressure valves in old boilers, they have to release, or the whole system fails catastrophically." She started picking up the larger pieces with her good hand, humming some melody I didn't recognize, and when I tried to help, she waved me away with the bloody towel. No, this is my mess. But maybe we could both try harder to keep the sink clear? Dried food attracts roaches, and once they establish a colony in the walls, you have to fumigate the entire building." The way she said it, calm and factual, while blood seeped through the towel and glass glittered across our kitchen floor, made every hair on my arms stand straight up. After that night, living with Natalie became like navigating a minefield, where the bombs were invisible and constantly shifting position. Some days she'd be her old self, bringing home pastries from the French bakery down the street, organizing our spice rack by cuisine type, discussing her theory about why mystery novels were actually comfort reading for anxious people. But then I'd commit some unknowable infraction, like leaving my shoes slightly off the mat or using her special olive oil for cooking instead of finishing, and I'd watch her entire body go rigid. She never yelled, which somehow made it worse. Instead, she'd stand perfectly still, jaw muscles twitching, fingers drumming against her thigh in this rapid staccato that sounded like typing on an invisible keyboard. "People don't respect boundaries until they're forced to," she'd say, voice flat as week-old soda. "My mother taught me that when I was 7, right after she made my father sleep in his car for a month because he kept forgetting to use coasters." The comments got progressively stranger as April rolled into May. She'd mentioned casually over breakfast how her previous roommate had moved out for her own good, after Natalie had to teach her about consequences. When I asked what that meant, she just smiled and said some people needed visual aids to learn properly. She started leaving library books on the coffee table, all of them about historical poisonings or famous unsolved disappearances, with specific pages bookmarked and passages highlighted in yellow. One morning I found her in the kitchen at 5 a.m., fully dressed for work, using a meat tenderizer to pound chicken breasts with mechanical precision. "Did you know," she said without looking up, each word punctuated by a wet thud, "that the human skull has approximately the same resistance as a coconut? Learned that from a forensics librarian at a conference in Milwaukee. Fascinating what people study." She kept pounding that chicken until it was basically paste, then calmly scraped it into the trash and left for work without another word. I started spending more time at work, volunteering for late shifts just to avoid the apartment, but that seemed to agitate her more. She'd text me constantly when I wasn't home, always phrased like concerned questions, but with this underlying edge. "Hope you're safe out there. The news said there was an accident on Western Avenue." Then 5 minutes later, "Your bedroom window is open, should I close it?" Then, "That photo on your dresser, is that your sister? She looks just like you." I'd come home to find tiny things moved in my room. Nothing dramatic enough to confront her about, but enough to know she'd been in there. My jewelry box shifted 2 inches to the left. My laptop closed when I'd left it open. A single earring moved from one compartment to another. When I bought a doorknob with a lock from Home Depot, she watched me install it from the hallway, arms crossed, saying nothing except, "Locks only work if someone respects them enough not to break down the door." The kitchen table incident happened on a humid Tuesday night that made the whole apartment smell like mildew and old wood. I'd been at my friend Catherine's place until almost midnight, helping her pack for a move to Portland, and came home to find Natalie sitting in complete darkness at our kitchen table. The streetlight outside threw these long shadows across the room, and I could just make out her silhouette hunched over something, her arm moving in deliberate, repetitive motions. The sound hit me before my eyes adjusted. This slow, methodical scraping, like someone filing their nails but deeper, more purposeful. When I flipped on the light, she didn't even flinch. She had one of those expensive Japanese kitchen knives, the kind she'd specifically told me never to touch, and she was dragging it across the wood grain of our table, carving deep gouges that spelled out words I couldn't quite read upside down. Wood shavings covered her lap like snow, and the knife blade caught the light with each downward stroke. "It slipped," she said, not looking up from her work, voice casual, as if she was explaining a spilled cup of coffee. "Been slipping for about an hour now, just back and forth, back and forth. Funny how accidents can be so repetitive." She ran her thumb along the blade, testing its edge, and I noticed she'd carved the word respect multiple times across the table's surface, each version deeper than the last, some letters overlapping into an illegible mess of splintered wood. "Did you have fun with Catherine? I called her roommate earlier just to make sure you were really there. Can't be too careful these days. People lie about the smallest things." She finally looked up at me then, and her pupils were so dilated that her eyes looked completely black, like a shark's. "I made you dinner, by the way. It's in the fridge. Chicken parmesan with that bread you like from the place on Ashland. I even used a meat mallet to tenderize it properly this time, not like this morning's practice session." She stood up slowly, wiping the blade clean with the same careful attention someone might use to clean a baby's face, folded a dish towel around it, and placed it back in the knife block. The table looked like a cutting board used by someone who'd never learned proper technique, just wild, angry scores, across what used to be a nice piece of furniture I'd found at an estate sale in Lincoln Park. "I'll sand this down tomorrow," she said, brushing wood shavings from her pajama pants. Make it smooth again. Maybe refinish it with that Danish oil you mentioned liking. Fresh starts are important, don't you think? Like when my last roommate decided to start fresh in a new city after she understood how things needed to be. She walked past me toward her bedroom, stopping just long enough to squeeze my shoulder with fingers that felt too cold for someone who'd been inside all evening. You should eat something before bed. Double check your lock tonight, the humidity makes these old doors swell, might not catch properly. That night I barely slept, just lay there listening to every creak and pop our old building made, convinced each sound was Natalie testing my doorknob. Around 3 a.m. I heard this persistent scratching, like fingernails dragging across wood, coming from right outside my door. It went on for maybe 20 minutes, stopping whenever I shifted in bed, then starting again once I stayed still. I wanted to call someone, but what would I say? My roommate carved up our table and now she's scratching at my door. They'd think I was having some kind of breakdown. When my alarm went off at 7, I found deep scratches around my door lock, fresh grooves in the paint that exposed raw wood underneath, and what looked like metal shavings on the floor. Natalie was already gone for work, but she'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Noticed your lock seems loose, probably from all that humidity warping. Hardware store on North has better ones, the kind that actually work. Made you coffee, 2 sugars like you prefer. Have a productive day. I moved out that afternoon while she was at work. Didn't even pack properly, just threw everything into garbage bags in my car. Left half my furniture because I couldn't fit it and honestly didn't care. Catherine let me crash at her place until I found a studio in Rogers Park, and I never went back for the security deposit or my last month's rent. About a week later, Natalie sent me a single text with a photo attached. My old bedroom door, completely removed from its hinges and leaning against the hallway wall. The message just said, "Renovating your old room for the next tenant. Amazing what you can see once barriers are removed. By the way, you left your grandmother's necklace in the medicine cabinet. I'm keeping it safe until you understand why respect matters." I blocked her number, changed my locks twice at the new place, and still wake up sometimes thinking I hear that scratching sound, like fingernails looking for a way in. Moving into that apartment on Cedar Street should have been perfect. January in Boston is brutal, and finding a place with reasonable rent and working heat seemed too good to be true. The ad said, "Professional female seeking clean, responsible roommate," and during our video chat, Melissa seemed normal enough. She worked in pharmaceutical research, had a pleasant laugh, and even joked about how her last roommate left dishes in the sink for days. When she offered me the room after just one conversation, saying she had a good feeling about me, I jumped at the chance. My job at the museum had just gone full-time, and after crashing on couches since graduation 5 years earlier, I was ready for stability. The day I moved in, she'd left a welcome basket on the kitchen counter with organic tea, locally made soap, and a handwritten note about keeping our shared space harmonious. Within the first week, I noticed the labels. Every shelf in the refrigerator had one. Every cabinet too. Not just Melissa and guest, but specific instructions printed on a label maker in tiny, precise font. Dairy products, seal completely after each use, and leftovers, date and consume within 48 hours. And raw meat, bottom shelf only in sealed container. I actually found it helpful at first, coming from places where roommates ate each other's food without asking. Melissa explained she'd had food poisoning once that put her in the hospital for 3 days, nearly caused kidney failure, and ever since she'd been careful about food safety. Made sense to me. She kept a detailed cleaning schedule posted on the fridge with checkboxes for daily, weekly, and monthly tasks, all color-coded by room. She'd already filled in her initials for the next 2 weeks. When I grabbed the pen to add mine to a few slots, she gently took it from my hand and produced an identical pen from a drawer, explaining we each needed our own to prevent cross-contamination of germs. By March, the rules had multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish. Hand washing became mandatory every hour. on the hour. Melissa installed a small chime system in the apartment that would ring, and wherever I was, whatever I was doing, I had to stop and wash. She bought special soap, the medical-grade kind that surgeons use, and demonstrated the proper technique while counting to 20 in her head. The bathroom door had to stay open during washing so she could hear the water running for the full duration. She started timing my showers too, knocking after exactly 7 minutes to remind me that longer exposure to moisture encouraged mold growth in the bathroom. The kitchen sponge got replaced daily, and she began photographing it each night before bed to ensure I hadn't used it incorrectly during the day. She showed me these photos sometimes, zooming in on areas where she claimed to see improper ringing patterns or evidence I'd cleaned the counter in the wrong direction. Her bedroom door had 3 different locks on it by then, and she carried all the keys on a lanyard around her neck, even when she was home. Once I walked past while she was entering and caught a glimpse inside. The room looked like a medical supply closet had merged with a laboratory. Shelves of cleaning products lined one wall, all facing the same direction with labels turned outward. She had what appeared to be an air purifier in every corner, their white noise creating a constant hum that seeped through the walls at night. A desk held several notebooks, their spines labeled with dates, and a laptop connected to what I realized was a camera system. She noticed me looking and quickly shut the door, but not before I saw my own face on the screen, captured from what must have been a camera in the living room. That night at dinner, she casually mentioned she'd installed security cameras for our safety just in the common areas, nothing invasive. She said it while cutting her chicken into perfectly equal squares, each one exactly the same size, arranged in a grid on her plate before she'd take a single bite. The smell incident happened on a Tuesday. I'd made myself a tuna sandwich for lunch, nothing fancy, just something quick between meetings while working from home. Melissa walked in as I was eating at the kitchen table and her whole body went rigid. She covered her nose with both hands and backed against the wall like I'd pulled out a weapon. The way she looked at me, eyes wide and glassy, you'd think I was eating roadkill. She started gagging, actually ran to the bathroom, and I heard her throwing up. When she came back, pale and shaking, she had a printed sheet in her hand. New rule, effective immediately. No fish products in the apartment, ever. The smell, she explained, could permeate the air filtration system and trigger her migraines. She made me throw out the sandwich, the rest of the tuna, even the mayo because it had been contaminated by proximity. Then she supervised while I scrubbed the table with 3 different cleaners, opened every window despite it being 40 degrees outside, and ran the kitchen fan for 6 hours straight. After that, the food rules became a minefield I couldn't navigate. No garlic, onions, or anything from the allium family. No fermented foods because they indicated bacterial growth. No reheating takeout because restaurants couldn't be trusted to follow proper safety protocols. She started inspecting my groceries when I brought them home, checking expiration dates with a magnifying glass, questioning the storage temperature of the store I'd shopped at, once throwing away a whole bag of apples because one had a tiny brown spot that she said indicated widespread cellular decay. She began sending me articles about foodborne illnesses at all hours, with subject lines like, "This is why we check dates," and "Woman dies from unwashed lettuce, please read." My phone would buzz at 2, 3 in the morning with links to medical journals about parasites found in improperly stored grain products. She'd quiz me about them the next day, standing in my doorway with her arms crossed, asking if I'd understood the severity of the risk I was bringing into our home. I started getting sick on a Wednesday morning in April. Nothing dramatic at first, just a wave of nausea that hit while I was brushing my teeth. I figured it was stress, maybe lack of sleep from tiptoeing around the apartment like I was defusing a bomb. But then came the dizziness, strong enough that I had to grab the bathroom counter to stay upright. My mouth tasted like copper pennies, and my stomach cramped hard enough to double me over. Melissa heard me dry heaving and appeared in the doorway, keeping a careful distance of at least 6 feet. She didn't offer help or ask if I was okay. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started recording, narrating in a flat voice about contamination protocols and documenting the time and my symptoms. She said I'd probably eaten something improper, that this was inevitable given my casual approach to food safety. While I sat on the bathroom floor, she sprayed disinfectant in the hallway, creating a chemical fog between us. The next morning was worse. I woke up feeling like someone had filled my body with wet sand, everything heavy and wrong. My coffee tasted bitter, almost medicinal, but I forced it down because I needed the caffeine to get through my workday. By noon, the room wouldn't stop spinning, and my keyboard looked like it was melting at the edges of my vision. I managed to send an email to my supervisor saying I needed to log off early, then stumbled to my bed. Through the wall, I could hear Melissa on the phone, her voice carrying that satisfied tone people get when they've been proven right. She was telling someone about my illness, using medical terms I didn't recognize, saying something about incubation periods and symptomatic progression. Later, she slipped a note under my door with a list of everything I'd eaten in the past 72 hours that could have caused this, each item annotated with potential contamination vectors and probability percentages she'd calculated herself. Friday destroyed any doubt I had about what was happening. I'd stopped eating her food completely by then, surviving on sealed protein bars and bottled water I kept in my room. But somehow the sickness got worse. My joints ached like someone was driving needles through them, and my skin felt too tight for my body. I dragged myself to the kitchen around midnight for some crackers, moving slow to avoid waking her. The apartment was dark except for a strip of light under Melissa's door. As I reached for my crackers box, I noticed my water bottle from earlier sitting on the counter. I specifically remembered leaving it in my room. The cap was on, but the safety seal I'd made with tape was broken. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I grabbed the bottle and held it up to the window, using the streetlight to see inside. There, swirling at the bottom like tiny ghosts, were white particles that definitely hadn't been there before. I heard her door open before I saw her. She stood in the hallway, backlit so I couldn't see her face, just her silhouette in those medical scrubs she wore as pajamas. Neither of us moved for what felt like hours but was probably seconds. Then she spoke, her voice calm and measured like she was explaining something obvious to a child. She said I was contaminating the environment, that my presence was a bacterial hazard, that she'd been documenting everything for weeks. The way I breathed wrong, spreading germs, how I walked, stirring up dust particles. My very existence in her space was an infection that needed to be treated. She had notebooks full of evidence, she said, photos of every surface I'd touched, samples of my hair she'd collected from the shower drain, detailed logs of my bathroom habits. She'd calculated the exact rate at which I was deteriorating the apartment's sterility. Her voice never changed pitch, never showed emotion, just delivered this information like she was reading a grocery list while I stood there holding that bottle with whatever she'd put in it. She took a step forward, and I saw her face clearly for the first time in days. Her eyes had dark circles so deep they looked bruised, and her lips were cracked and bleeding at the corners from constant washing and sanitizing. She told me she'd been trying to help me understand through progressive intervention, small doses of ipecac in my coffee to induce mild nausea, hoping I'd connect it to my poor hygiene habits. Activated charcoal mixed into my water to absorb the toxins she believed I was spreading. She'd researched everything carefully, she assured me, keeping the doses just below dangerous levels. She had spreadsheets tracking my reactions, graphs showing the correlation between my symptoms and my contamination incidents. This was for my own good, she explained, and for the good of everyone who had to share air with me. Her hands shook as she talked, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She mentioned she hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time in weeks, too busy monitoring the apartment's bacterial load and documenting my infractions. I left that night with nothing but my laptop and the clothes I was wearing. Called my cousin from my car, barely able to explain why I needed to crash at his place immediately. The next day, while Melissa was at work, I went back with him and 2 of his friends to get my stuff. We found my room exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. On my pillow was a printed report, 43 pages thick, titled, "Contamination Incident Log, Case Study of Infectious Tenant." Every page contained timestamps, photos, and detailed observations of my daily activities. The last entry was from that morning, noting the time I'd left and calculating how many hours it would take for the apartment's air quality to return to baseline. I took photos of everything and filed a police report. Though they said without proof she'd actually poisoned me, there wasn't much they could do. The toxicology test I took showed traces of ipecac and activated charcoal, just like she'd admitted, but neither substance was illegal to possess. I never pressed charges. Part of me just wanted it over, and part of me genuinely believed she needed help more than punishment. Found out later from the landlord that she'd been evicted 2 months after I left. The neighbors had complained about chemical smells and the sound of multiple air purifiers running 24 hours a day. He said when he finally got inside, she'd covered every surface in plastic sheeting and had been sleeping in what was essentially a homemade clean room she'd built in the living room. Finding a decent room in Denver during the spring of 2022 was about as likely as snow in July, especially with my budget stretched thinner than dollar store toilet paper. After crashing on couches for 2 months following a messy breakup, I jumped at the Craigslist ad for a furnished bedroom in a 2-story house near Colfax Avenue. The rent was reasonable, utilities included, and the owner, an older guy named Harold who lived out of state, only asked for first month and a small deposit. When I met my potential roommate Colin during the walkthrough, he seemed like the ideal match. Quiet, clean-cut, worked some kind of night security job that kept him out most evenings. He had this precise way of speaking, measuring each word before letting it out, and his handshake felt practiced, like he'd learned it from a YouTube tutorial. But hell, after dealing with my ex's constant drama and her collection of rescue ferrets that destroyed everything, a boring roommate sounded perfect. Moving in took all of 20 minutes since everything I owned fit in my beat-up Subaru Outback. Colin helped carry my boxes upstairs, mentioning he'd been living there for about 8 months and liked keeping to himself. Fair enough, I thought, since I wasn't looking for a new best friend either. That first week went smooth as butter. We crossed paths maybe twice, usually when I was heading to my morning shift at the warehouse and he was just getting in. He'd give this little nod, keys jingling in his hand, and disappear into his room at the end of the hall. The house had this old-school layout with creaky hardwood floors that announced every footstep, thin walls that let you hear when someone turned on a faucet, and a shared bathroom between our bedrooms. But the place was clean, the Wi-Fi worked, and nobody was screaming about ferrets chewing through electrical cords at 2 in the morning. It wasn't until the second week that I noticed the pattern. Every single night, no matter what, Colin would come home at exactly 3 in the morning. I'm talking exactly, like he had an alarm set to walk through that door at 3:01. The house would be dead quiet, then I'd hear his key in the lock, the front door creaking open, his footsteps on those old stairs. Always the same rhythm, same pace, like he was counting each step. Then came the shower. Within 2 minutes of getting home, I'd hear the bathroom door close and the water start running. Not unusual for someone getting off a late shift, except Colin would stay in there for an hour, sometimes longer. The water would run the entire time, and through those thin walls I could hear him scrubbing, this aggressive, repetitive sound, like he was trying to remove his own skin. The soap dispenser would pump over and over, and there was this other noise, metal on porcelain, that I later figured out was him using a nail brush on his hands. One night I got up to pee around 4:30 and found the bathroom door still closed, steam seeping out from underneath like smoke from a fire. The water was running, but it had changed from the rush of hot water to that hollow sound pipes make when the heater tank is empty. Colin was still in there, still scrubbing, and I could hear him breathing hard, these sharp little gasps between the sound of bristles on skin. I knocked, asked if everything was okay, and the scrubbing stopped immediately. Total silence except for the cold water hitting the tub. Then his voice came through the door, calm and measured like always, saying he'd be done in a minute. When he finally came out 15 minutes later, his hands were raw and pink, the skin around his nails white and puckered like he'd been underwater for hours. He walked past me without making eye contact, leaving wet footprints down the hall, and I noticed his fingernails were so clean they almost looked fake, like those display hands at nail salons. Colin's room was at the end of the hall, past the bathroom, and he kept it locked even when he was home. Not just locked, but deadbolted, with one of those heavy-duty locks you see on storage units. I only noticed because I was helping Harold's handyman fix a leak in the ceiling one afternoon while Colin was out. The guy, Rick, made some joke about Fort Knox while gesturing at Colin's door, then told me Colin had installed that lock himself, drilled right into the door frame without asking permission. Rick had been in there once, months before I moved in, to check the radiator. Said the room was sparse, just a mattress on the floor and boxes stacked against the walls, everything labeled with dates in black marker. But what stuck with him was this metal lockbox, like a small safe, that Colin had tucked behind his dresser. When Rick moved the dresser to get to the radiator, Colin appeared out of nowhere, even though he was supposed to be at work, and practically shoved the furniture back into place. About 3 weeks into living there, I was grabbing my laundry from my room when I heard this crash from Colin's end of the hall. Not like something falling, more like metal hitting wood, followed by dead silence. I called out, asking if he was okay, and got nothing back. His door was closed, that giant lock gleaming in the hallway light. I figured he'd dropped something and didn't want to deal with conversation, which tracked with his whole vibe. But later that night, around midnight, I passed his room on my way to the kitchen and heard him talking on the phone. His voice was different, higher pitched and nervous, saying something about keeping them separated and rotation schedule, and how he needed at least another month. Then he must have moved closer to the door because I heard him say, clear as day, "Nobody knows. The new roommate doesn't suspect anything." I practically tiptoed back to my room, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to convince myself I'd misheard or taken it out of context. The next morning was a Saturday, and Colin had actually left the house before noon for once. Said something about picking up supplies for work when he passed me in the kitchen, his freshly scrubbed hands wrapped around a travel mug of coffee. I watched from the window as his gray Toyota Camry pulled away, then found myself standing in the hallway, staring at his door. Curiosity was eating at me, that phone conversation playing on repeat in my head. I told myself I was just going to check if the door was actually locked, maybe peek through the keyhole. But when I grabbed the doorknob and twisted, it turned. The lock was engaged, but the door wasn't fully latched, like Colin had pulled it closed in a hurry without checking. My rational brain screamed at me to walk away, respect his privacy, don't be that roommate. But my hand was already pushing the door open, just enough to see inside. The smell hit me first, this mix of industrial bleach and something metallic underneath, like pennies left in vinegar. The room was exactly how Rick described it, mattress on the floor with military-tight sheets, boxes along every wall labeled with dates going back 8 months. But there were new additions. A folding table in the corner held cleaning supplies arranged like surgical tools, bottles of bleach, hydrogen peroxide, rubbing alcohol, boxes of latex gloves, and nail brushes still in their packaging. The dresser had been pulled out slightly from the wall, and I could see the edge of that metal lockbox behind it. Without thinking, I stepped into the room, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The box was heavier than it looked, maybe 40 pounds, and when I tried to shift it, something inside moved with a dull thud, like a bowling ball rolling in slow motion. There was a padlock on the front, one of those expensive ones that probably cost more than our monthly utilities. I was reaching for it when I heard a car door slam outside. Panic shot through me like electricity, and I practically dove behind the dresser, shoving the lockbox back into place. The front door opened downstairs, but instead of Colin's measured footsteps, I heard voices. Multiple people laughing about something. Definitely not Colin. Just the neighbors from across the street. My legs felt like jelly as I backed out of the room, pulling the door exactly how I'd found it, making sure that lock was positioned just right. I spent the rest of the day in my room, jumping every time a car passed, convinced Colin would somehow know I'd been in there. When he came home that night at his usual 3 in the morning, I lay in bed listening to his routine. The footsteps, the bathroom door, the endless shower. But this time, after the water stopped, I heard him in the hallway. He stood outside my door for what felt like forever, just breathing. Then his footsteps moved away, his door opened and closed, and I heard the distinct sound of that metal box being dragged across the floor. 2 days later, I was scrolling through my phone during lunch break when a news alert popped up. Police seek information on late-night break-ins in Park Hill area. My thumb hovered over the link, something cold settling in my gut. The article described a series of home invasions over the past 8 months, always between 2 and 4 in the morning. The suspect was described as a white male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing dark clothing and carrying a black backpack. Security footage from one house showed a grainy figure in a baseball cap, but what made my mouth go dry was the next part. Residents reported missing items weren't valuable, just personal things. Family photos, pieces of jewelry with sentimental value, even old clothes. One woman said her grandmother's wedding ring disappeared, worthless to anyone but her. Another family lost a baby blanket their son had been buried with, taken right from their memorial shadow box. The detective quoted in the article said they were dealing with someone who wasn't motivated by money, which made the crimes harder to predict and solve. I couldn't focus the rest of my shift, the description running through my head on repeat. 6 feet tall, check. Dark clothing, Colin owned nothing but black and gray. The black backpack he carried to his supposed security job every night. The timeline matched perfectly with when he'd moved in. But it was those stolen items that really got me. Personal things with emotional weight. The kind of stuff you'd keep in labeled boxes with dates on them. That night I waited up, sitting in the dark kitchen with a view of the front door. Colin came home at 3:01, same as always, but this time I noticed details I'd missed before. His backpack looked fuller than when he'd left, bulging in odd places like it was stuffed with irregular shapes. There were scratches on his hands I hadn't seen earlier, thin red lines across his knuckles. He noticed me in the kitchen and stopped, both of us frozen in this weird standoff. "Couldn't sleep," I said, trying to sound casual. He nodded, that same mechanical gesture, but his eyes stayed on me longer than usual before he headed upstairs. The shower ran for 2 hours that night. The next evening, I decided to check the laundry room while Colin was supposedly at work. We had one of those old washer-dryer combos in the basement, the kind that takes forever to run a cycle. I hadn't done laundry in a few days, figured I'd throw in a load before bed. But when I opened the washer, it was already full of wet clothes, twisted together like they'd been sitting there for hours. I pulled out a shirt, some designer brand I'd never seen Colin wear, way too small for him anyway. Then came a woman's cardigan with pearl buttons, a kid's soccer jersey with Mason printed on the back, a man's tie with someone's initials embroidered on it. None of it was Colin's, none of it was mine. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had a side job at a dry cleaner, maybe he was doing laundry for friends, but deep down I knew. These were trophies, someone else's memories that he was washing clean, stripping away the smell and DNA evidence before adding them to those dated boxes in his room. I stuffed everything back in the washer, closed it, and went upstairs to pack my things. I was out of that house within an hour, crashing at a motel until I could find a new place. Called in an anonymous tip to the police the next morning, told them about Colin, the house on Colfax, the clothes in the washer. Never heard if anything came of it, but the break-ins stopped according to the news. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 in the morning, and I swear I can hear that shower running, the sound of someone scrubbing their guilt away, one stolen memory at a time. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it was all I could afford while waitressing nights at a diner off Highway 99. 23 and still figuring things out, I'd been crashing on couches since my parents sold the house and moved to Arizona for Dad's health. When I saw the ad for a roommate on the campus bulletin board, neat handwriting offering a furnished room for $350 a month, I almost cried from relief. The girl who answered my call sounded professional, maybe a few years older than me, introducing herself as Veronica. She worked in medical billing, she said, and just needed someone quiet and clean to help with rent. We met at a coffee shop near campus that same week, and she brought a folder with apartment photos, utility breakdowns, even a suggested chore schedule typed up and laminated. Veronica had this way of making everything seem easy, like she'd already solved problems I hadn't even thought of yet. She wore business casual even on a Saturday, her auburn hair pulled back in a low bun that never seemed to have a single strand out of place. While I fumbled with my backpack, spilling pens everywhere, she calmly helped me gather them up, sliding a lease agreement across the table with highlighted sections for my convenience. The apartment was in a converted Victorian near downtown, nothing fancy but clean, with tall windows that actually opened, and a clawfoot tub that she'd already stocked with those expensive bath salts from the organic store. She even offered to wait on the security deposit until I got my next paycheck, writing up a little payment plan on letterhead she'd designed herself. Moving in felt like winning some kind of adult lottery, finally catching a break after months of everything going wrong. The first month was perfect, almost suspiciously so now that I think about it. Veronica had this whole system for everything, colored bins for recycling, a shared calendar on the fridge with our work schedules, even a little basket by the door where we'd sort mail. She taught me her filing method for important documents, insisting I keep my social security card and birth certificate in the fireproof safe she'd bought for us to share. When I mentioned struggling with my statistics homework, she connected me with a tutor from her office, some guy named Brandon who charged half the going rate. She'd cook extra portions of her meal prep on Sundays, leaving containers with my name written in her perfect cursive. My co-workers at the diner kept saying I looked healthier, more put together, and they were right. Having stability, having someone who seemed to genuinely care about organizing life's chaos, it changed everything. Small things started going missing in November, though I didn't connect them at first. A credit card offer I'd been expecting never showed up, but junk mail still arrived daily. My phone bill came 3 days late with a past due notice, even though I always paid through autopay. Veronica was sympathetic, helping me call customer service while she worked on her laptop beside me, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she did her medical coding. She even offered to add me to her family phone plan to save money, pulling up spreadsheets showing how much I'd save annually. When my student loan statement never arrived, she drove me to the campus financial aid office on her lunch break, waiting in her idling Camry while I sorted things out inside. The lady at the desk seemed confused, said they had updated contact information on file, some address in Nevada I'd never heard of. December brought the first real red flag, though I was too overwhelmed with finals to see it clearly. A collection notice arrived from a credit card company I'd never heard of, claiming I owed $800 on purchases made in October. Veronica found me crying at the kitchen table. The letter crumpled in my fist and immediately went into problem-solving mode. She made chamomile tea while calling the company on speaker, her voice calm and authoritative as she navigated the automated system. They insisted the card was opened online with my information, purchases made at electronic stores 2 towns over. Veronica suggested identity theft, probably someone at the diner who'd gotten hold of my information. Maybe that new busboy who kept asking personal questions. She helped me file a fraud report, sitting beside me at her perfectly organized desk as we went through each step, her hand occasionally squeezing my shoulder when I started shaking from stress. More bills started arriving after Christmas, when I was visiting my parents with money Veronica had lent me for the bus ticket. A gym membership downtown charging $70 monthly. Some meal delivery service sending invoices for $200 worth of organic smoothies, even a subscription to 3 different streaming services I'd never signed up for. Each time I called to dispute them, they had my social security number, my birth date, even knew my mother's maiden name. Veronica started a spreadsheet to track everything, color-coded by company and date, staying up late to help me write dispute letters. She bought a paper shredder for the apartment, insisted we destroy anything with personal information, even old grocery receipts. When I couldn't make rent in March because my bank account had been mysteriously frozen, she covered me without hesitation, waving off my tears with promises that we'd figure it out together. The breaking point came in April, when I decided to apply for a second job at a bookstore near campus. They ran a background check and called me 2 days later, the manager's voice careful and uncomfortable. There were 6 credit cards in default under my name, 2 car loans I'd supposedly walked away from, even an eviction from an apartment complex in Reno that I'd never stepped foot in. My credit score had dropped to 420, making me essentially unemployable anywhere that handled money. I sat in my car after that call, staring at the rejection email they'd sent as a follow-up, when something clicked about the Nevada addresses. Veronica had mentioned once that she'd lived in Reno before moving here. Something about her ex-boyfriend being trouble, needing a fresh start. The dates lined up too perfectly. All these accounts opened right around when we'd started living together. When she'd helped me organize all my documents in that fireproof safe, only she knew the combination too. I drove home early from my shift at the diner that night, telling my manager I had stomach problems, which wasn't entirely a lie given how nauseous I felt. Veronica's car wasn't in the driveway, and her bedroom door was cracked open for once. She usually kept it locked, respecting privacy, she'd always said, but the wood had swollen from spring rain and hadn't latched properly. Her room was meticulously organized like everything else in her life, but her desk drew my attention immediately. 3 monitors set up like some kind of command center, the middle one still glowing with an Excel spreadsheet. As I got closer, my legs feeling disconnected from my body, I could read the column headers: full name, SSN, DOB, mother's maiden, current balance. My information was highlighted in yellow, but there were 12 other rows, other names I didn't recognize, each with their own detailed financial breakdown. The desk drawers were locked, but the filing cabinet beside it wasn't, and inside I found folders with my name, each containing photocopies of documents I'd stored in that fireproof safe. My birth certificate, social security card, even the passport I'd gotten for a trip that never happened, all perfectly scanned and organized. Behind my folder were others, some with names crossed out in red ink, dates written beside them that I realized were probably when those people had moved out or discovered what was happening. One folder marked templates contained blank rental applications, credit card forms, and loan documents, all partially filled with different handwriting styles Veronica had apparently been practicing. The bottom drawer had boxes of blank checks from various banks, a card reader like the ones they use at craft fairs, and at least 15 different cell phones, most still in their packaging. My stomach churned when I found a notebook where she'd practiced my signature hundreds of times, getting progressively better until the last page where it was virtually identical to mine. I heard her key in the front door and panicked, my body moving before my brain could catch up. Grabbing my folder and as many others as I could carry, I slipped out through her window onto the fire escape, scraping my palms on the rusty metal. From the alley I could see her bedroom light turn on, heard her voice calling my name with that same concerned tone she'd used every time she'd pretended to help me. My car was parked on the street, and I drove straight to the police station, the folders sliding across my back seat every time I turned. The desk sergeant looked skeptical at first, probably used to roommate drama, but his expression changed when I spread out the evidence, showing him the spreadsheet I'd managed to photograph with my phone. They sent 2 officers to the apartment immediately, but Veronica was already gone, her room stripped clean except for the furniture that came with the place. The detective assigned to my case, a tired-looking woman named Gonzalez, told me Veronica Walsh wasn't even her real name. The real Veronica Walsh had died in a car accident in Ohio 3 years ago, around the same time my roommate had started her operation. They found at least 30 victims across 4 states, some dating back 5 years, all with the same pattern of helpful roommate or co-worker who slowly destroyed their financial lives. The medical billing company she claimed to work for didn't exist, though she'd created a convincing website and even fake pay stubs. Detective Gonzalez helped me file all the paperwork for identity recovery, a stack of forms that took 3 hours to complete, but she warned me it would take years to fully clean up my credit. The other victims they contacted had similar stories, all mentioning how genuinely caring she'd seemed, how she'd go out of her way to help with problems she was secretly creating. I moved back in with my parents after that, taking online classes to finish my degree while working at a call center that didn't require credit checks. Every piece of mail still makes my pulse race, wondering if it's another surprise bill or collection notice from something she opened months ago. The FBI got involved eventually, adding her to some kind of financial crimes database, but they never caught her. Sometimes I Google the names she's used, looking for new victims, warning others on forums or social media, but she's too smart to use the same identity twice. Last week I got a postcard from Seattle with no return address, just a photo of the Space Needle, and 2 words in that perfect cursive handwriting I'd once found so reassuring. Take care. I gave it to the detective, but we both knew she was probably 3 states away by the time it arrived, setting up her next helpful roommate situation, organizing someone else's documents in a new fireproof safe. Rent in the city had gotten so ridiculous that I'd started calculating how many meals I could skip to afford a decent place. My lease ended in May 2023, and after 2 months of couch surfing and scrolling through listings that made me question humanity, converted garages, basements that flooded seasonally, rooms where the private entrance meant crawling through a window, I finally found something that didn't make me want to cry. 2-bedroom apartment on Berkshire Road, natural light, functioning appliances, and rent that wouldn't require selling plasma twice a week. The catch was simple. It came with a roommate named Julian who'd already been living there for 8 months. The landlord said he was quiet, reliable, paid his half on time. That sounded ideal. I'd graduated with my communications degree back in 2021, spent the last couple years working at a marketing firm downtown, and honestly just needed a stable address while I figured out if this job was actually leading somewhere, or if I was just too scared to admit I'd made the wrong choice. Julian answered the door on move-in day, wearing sweatpants and a Pearl Jam shirt so faded the logo had nearly disappeared. Early 30s maybe. Dark hair buzzed short, pale skin that suggested he rarely saw daylight. He had this smile that seemed calculated, like he'd practiced the exact right amount of friendliness without overdoing it. Polite but distant, the kind of expression you'd give a bank teller. He helped me carry boxes up the stairs without being asked, which I appreciated. But between every trip, he'd wipe his hands on his pants like the cardboard texture bothered him more than it should. When we finished, he made coffee and walked me through the apartment's quirks with unsettling precision. The thermostat needed to be held at a 45-degree angle to register. The bathroom sink drained slow, so never fill it past halfway. The kitchen window stuck at a specific point, so forcing it might crack the frame. He listed everything like he was reading from a maintenance manual he'd memorized. Then, while rinsing out his mug, he mentioned almost casually that he'd been doing anger management therapy for about a year now. Breathing techniques, weekly sessions, journaling, all that stuff. He said it the same way someone might mention they'd started going to the gym. I told him that was good, really good, and tried not to let my expression change because honestly, everyone's working through something. The first week felt normal enough, or at least what I'd expected from living with a stranger. Julian kept to himself mostly, spending long stretches in his room with the door closed, only emerging for food or to use the bathroom. He worked from home doing something with data analysis. I never got the full explanation and didn't push for one. We developed this unspoken rhythm where we'd nod at each other in the hallway, maybe exchange a few words about groceries or whose turn it was to take out the trash, then retreat back to our separate spaces. He kept the shared areas obsessively clean, which I appreciated at first. The kitchen counter always gleamed. Dishes never sat in the sink for more than an hour. Even the living room couch cushions stayed perfectly aligned. I figured he just had high standards for cleanliness. Then on a Wednesday evening, I'd made myself dinner and left my coffee mug on the counter, while I went to grab my phone from my room. I couldn't have been gone more than 3 minutes. When I came back, Julian was standing in the kitchen, holding the mug with both hands, staring at it like it had personally insulted him. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath his skin, and his breathing came in short, controlled bursts through his nose. He didn't acknowledge me at all, just set the mug down in the exact center of the drying rack with deliberate precision, then walked to his room and closed the door hard enough that the frame shook. I stood there for a solid minute, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. The whole interaction had lasted maybe 15 seconds but left this uncomfortable weight in the air, like the moment after someone narrowly avoids a car accident and everyone's still processing how close it came. I picked up the mug and put it away in the cabinet, then spent the rest of the evening in my room wondering if I'd somehow violated some unspoken rule I didn't know existed. Maybe he'd had a bad day. Maybe the therapy wasn't working as well as he'd hoped. I convinced myself it was a one-time thing, just stress bubbling over in a weird way. People have off days. The next morning he acted completely normal, made small talk about the weather while we both grabbed breakfast, even laughed at some stupid joke I made about the news. I relaxed. Then that evening I left the bathroom light on by accident after brushing my teeth. And when I came back 10 minutes later, the bulb was unscrewed and sitting on the counter, and Julian's door was closed again. No explanation, no confrontation, just the removed bulb as evidence that I'd done something wrong. I screwed it back in and made a mental note to be more careful, but this uneasy feeling had started settling into my chest, this awareness that I was being watched and evaluated in ways I couldn't predict or understand. The incidents escalated in frequency, but never in any pattern I could map out. A cabinet door I'd left slightly ajar would be slammed shut hard enough that I'd hear it from my room, followed by complete silence. The television remote would disappear from the coffee table where I'd left it, only to reappear days later in the exact same spot, as if testing whether I'd notice or say something. One morning I found all the kitchen chairs pushed in at perfect 90-degree angles to the table, even though I'd left one pulled out the night before, when I'd gotten up for water. Julian never mentioned any of it. He'd pass me in the hallway with that same rehearsed smile, ask how work was going, comment on the weather forecast like we were neighbors making pleasant conversation over a fence. But I'd started noticing things about him that I'd missed initially. The way his fingers would drum against his thigh in rapid succession when he thought nobody was watching. How he'd pause mid-sentence sometimes and stare at a spot on the wall like he was fighting to stay present in the conversation. The fact that he always positioned himself in rooms so he could see the exits. The apartment began to feel like a stage where we were both performing normalcy, while something ugly festered underneath. I started keeping my bedroom door locked constantly, even when I was just going to the kitchen for 30 seconds. It felt paranoid. But the alternative, leaving my space unguarded, felt worse. Then came the night that changed everything. I'd gone to bed around 11, exhausted from a long day of pointless meetings and client emails that could have been texts. I'm normally a heavy sleeper, the kind of person who could sleep through a freight train passing 6 inches from my head. But around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a sound that my brain couldn't immediately identify. A rhythmic thumping, like someone beating a rug or hammering something soft. I lay there in the dark, disoriented and trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, when I heard what sounded like wood splintering, followed by a low guttural sound that might have been words, but came out too strangled to understand. My heart started pounding in that sick, heavy way where you can feel it in your throat and behind your eyes. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to navigate to my door, unlocked it as quietly as possible, and eased it open just enough to see into the living room. What I saw didn't make sense at first, like my brain refused to assemble the image into something coherent. The coffee table was flipped on its side. One of the chairs from the kitchen lay in pieces near the television, and Julian sat cross-legged in the center of the room in complete darkness, his back to me, shoulders rising and falling with deep, deliberate breaths. He wasn't moving otherwise, just sitting there like a statue, and in the faint light from the street lamps outside I could see he was staring at the broken chair with this intense focus, like if he looked away it might reassemble itself or vanish entirely. I must have made some sound, a sharp intake of breath, the floor creaking under my weight, something, because his head tilted slightly to the side, not turning to look at me but acknowledging that he knew I was there. My entire body went rigid. Every instinct screamed at me to close the door, Lock it. Maybe push my dresser against it for good measure, but I couldn't move. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 seconds. This awful suspended moment where I was terrified he'd turn around and equally terrified of what I'd see if he did. Then he spoke, and his voice came out flat and mechanical, stripped of any emotion. "Sometimes it just happens," he said. "I don't remember doing it. One second I'm fine, the next everything's broken and I'm sitting here trying to figure out what triggered it." He still hadn't looked at me. I managed to force words out of my throat, asked if he was okay, if he needed anything, stupid questions born from the desperate human need to fill horrible silence with something. Anything. He shook his head slowly and told me to go back to bed, that he'd clean it up in the morning, that I shouldn't worry about it. The way he said shouldn't worry made it clear that I absolutely should worry, that we both knew this had crossed some line we couldn't uncross. I backed into my room, closed the door, locked it, and spent the rest of the night sitting on my bed with my phone in my hand, debating whether to call someone but having no idea who or what I'd even say. Morning came with aggressive sunlight and the sound of Julian cleaning the living room. I stayed in my room until I heard his door close, then ventured out to find everything restored to perfect order. The table upright, the broken chair gone, even the carpet vacuumed to erase any evidence of debris. If I hadn't seen it myself, I could have convinced myself I'd had some vivid nightmare brought on by stress or bad takeout. But I had seen it, and now I couldn't unsee it, couldn't pretend this was just an eccentric roommate with quirks I needed to tolerate. I started spending more time away from the apartment, taking longer routes home from work, grabbing dinner out instead of cooking, finding excuses to visit friends even on weeknights when I'd normally collapse on the couch with Netflix. Anything to minimize the hours I spent sharing space with someone whose anger existed on a hair trigger I couldn't see or predict. Julian seemed to notice my absence but never commented on it directly. He'd leave passive observations in conversation. "Haven't seen you much lately," or "You're keeping busy these days," delivered in that same flat tone that made every statement feel like an accusation wrapped in fake concern. The apartment had become a minefield where I couldn't identify the mines, where every action or inaction might be the thing that set him off, and the not knowing was almost worse than the outbursts themselves. That's when things inside my room started changing. Small things at first, easy to dismiss as coincidence or my own forgetfulness. A book I'd left on my nightstand would be on my desk when I got home from work. My laptop charger, which I always coiled in a specific way, would be loosely draped across my chair. The framed photo of my family on the dresser got turned to face the wall, and I absolutely know, that I didn't do that because I looked at that photo every morning while getting dressed. I'd locked my door every single time I left, checked it twice, even tested the handle to make sure it caught properly. But locks only work if you're the only one with a key, and Julian had lived here for 8 months before I arrived. The landlord had probably given him a full set when he moved in. The realization hit me like cold water. He'd been coming into my room while I was gone, touching my things, moving them just enough that I'd notice, but not enough that I could prove anything definitively. It was a message, a demonstration of power, a reminder that nowhere in this apartment was actually mine. I started taking photos of my room before I left each day, documenting exactly where I'd placed everything, building evidence even though I had no idea what I'd do with it. My desk lamp unplugged itself. My closet door that I always kept closed would be hanging open. One afternoon I came home to find every drawer in my dresser pulled out exactly 3 inches, a perfect uniform gap that couldn't have happened naturally. The note appeared on a Tuesday evening in late June. I'd gotten home around 7, unlocked my door, and immediately noticed the small folded piece of paper on the floor just inside the threshold, like it had been slipped underneath while I was gone. My hands felt numb as I picked it up. Regular printer paper, the kind we had stacked near the living room desk, folded into a precise rectangle with corners that lined up perfectly. I unfolded it and found 3 words written in the center in neat, mechanical handwriting. "You push limits." That was it. No signature, no explanation, no context, Just those 3 words that could mean absolutely anything or nothing depending on how paranoid I wanted to be. Except I knew exactly what it meant. It meant he'd been cataloging every minor deviation from his invisible rules. The times I'd forgotten to push my chair in all the way. The morning I'd left the shower curtain bunched instead of spread evenly. The coffee grounds I'd accidentally spilled near the trash can and thought I'd cleaned up completely. It meant he'd been keeping score, and I'd crossed some threshold that existed only in his head, some arbitrary line that now put me in danger I couldn't measure or escape. I stood there holding that note, and realized with absolute clarity that I couldn't stay here. Couldn't keep playing this game where the rules changed constantly, and the penalties for breaking them kept escalating towards something I didn't want to imagine. I called my friend Travis that night and asked if I could crash at his place for a while. Gave him some vague explanation about roommate issues that he didn't push me on because he could hear the urgency in my voice. The next day, I took a sick day from work and moved most of my essential stuff out while Julian was gone. Clothes, laptop, important documents, anything I couldn't afford to lose or have damaged. I left the furniture and the smaller items because I didn't have time for multiple trips and didn't want to be there when he got back. I thought about confronting him, maybe leaving my own note explaining that this wasn't working out. But every scenario I played out in my head ended with him standing too close to me in the hallway, breathing that controlled way, asking me to explain exactly what I meant by my complaints. The idea made my chest tighten. I left my key on the kitchen counter next to a brief text I'd sent the landlord about breaking the lease early, willing to lose my deposit and probably get sued if it meant getting out safely. As I loaded the last box into my car, I looked up at the apartment window and saw the curtain move slightly. Just a small shift in the fabric that could have been wind or could have been Julian watching me leave. I didn't wait to find out which. The landlord called me 3 days later, irritated about the sudden departure, but more concerned about Julian, who'd apparently had some kind of episode after I left. A neighbor reported hearing crashes and yelling, and when the landlord went to check on things, he found Julian in the middle of another destructive spiral. Holes punched in walls, the bathroom mirror shattered, furniture overturned in ways that suggested pure rage rather than calculated intimidation. The landlord had to call the police and Julian got taken somewhere for evaluation, mandatory this time instead of voluntary. Turned out his anger management therapy had been court-ordered after an incident at his previous apartment, something involving a former roommate and property destruction that had nearly turned into assault. The landlord admitted he'd known about it but figured everyone deserved a second chance, that Julian had seemed stable when he'd signed the lease. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or just exhausted. Part of me felt guilty for abandoning the situation, like maybe if I'd handled things differently or been more patient, it wouldn't have escalated. But the rational part of my brain knew that wasn't my responsibility, that I'd done exactly what I needed to do to protect myself from someone whose problems were way beyond anything I could fix or manage. I never went back to that apartment, never tried to retrieve the stuff I'd left behind. Travis let me stay on his couch for 6 weeks until I found a new place, a studio apartment with no roommates and a lock that only I had keys to. The listing popped up on my phone during a lunch break at the hospital where I had just started orientation. Affordable 2-bedroom near campus, roommate already living there, move in whenever. I was crashing on my friend's couch at the time and getting desperate for my own space, especially with 12-hour night shifts about to start. The current tenant, Vincent, responded within minutes. His texts were friendly, professional, mentioned he worked in IT support and traveled sometimes for conferences. We arranged to meet that Friday evening in late June 2023. When I pulled up, he was already outside waiting, dressed in a polo shirt with some tech company logo and khaki pants. He looked exactly like every IT guy I had ever met at the hospital, non-threatening, kind of awkward, eager to be helpful. The apartment was clean, the neighborhood felt safe, and Vincent kept reassuring me that the building was quiet and secure. I told him about my nursing schedule, the night shifts, and he said that actually worked perfectly since he was usually awake late anyway working on projects. I signed the papers that same evening. I moved my stuff in on a Saturday, and Vincent was there the whole time, practically jumping to help carry boxes up the stairs. He kept talking about improvements he wanted to make to the place, how he liked keeping things updated and efficient. The next day, Sunday afternoon, he showed up at my bedroom door holding a shopping bag from Best Buy. He had bought smart bulbs for the hallway in my room, plus this sleek little Wi-Fi extender that he said would boost the signal on my side of the apartment. There was also a smart speaker for the living room. He explained it would all help lower our electric bill and make things more convenient, especially for me coming home at odd hours from the hospital. Vincent set everything up himself, handed me his tablet to download the control app, and walked me through connecting each device. He positioned the extender right outside my bedroom door, angled toward the hallway. When I asked if he needed one for his side too, he laughed and said his room already had great signal. He demonstrated the voice commands, the dimming features, how I could set schedules for when I wanted lights on or off. It felt generous, honestly, like he was trying to be a good roommate and make me comfortable in a new place. The first week passed without incident. I worked my shifts, came home exhausted, and barely interacted with Vincent beyond polite greetings in the kitchen. He kept odd hours himself, often still awake when I dragged myself through the door at 7 in the morning. The smart bulbs were actually pretty convenient. I could turn off all the lights from my bed using my phone, which beat stumbling around in the dark. But then weird things started happening, small things that I tried to brush off as coincidence or technical glitches. The hallway light would turn on by itself around 3 in the morning, the exact time I usually got up to use the bathroom during my sleep. The first time it happened, I figured maybe I had set some kind of automatic timer and forgotten about it. The second time, I checked the app and there was no schedule programmed. The third time, I mentioned it to Vincent while making coffee, and he acted concerned, said sometimes the sensors could be finicky, offered to look into it. He messed with his phone for a minute and said he reset something. The lights stayed off for 2 nights after that. Then it started happening again, but worse. The smart speaker in the living room would activate at random times, that little light ring glowing blue like it was listening, even though nobody had said the wake word. I would be lying in bed trying to sleep after my shift, and I would hear that soft chime it made when turning on, coming from the other room. One morning around 9, when I should have been deep asleep, the speaker suddenly started playing music. Nothing I had ever listened to, some instrumental jazz that I definitely had not requested. I got up, annoyed and disoriented, and told it to stop. When I checked the app history later, it showed no record of any command being given. Vincent was supposedly at work, or at least his bedroom door was closed and his car was gone. That afternoon, when he got home, I brought it up again. Tried to keep my tone casual and not accusatory. He frowned, said maybe the speaker was picking up commands from a neighbor's unit through the walls, suggested we change the wake word to something more unique. We changed it together, standing in the living room, and he seemed just as puzzled and frustrated as I felt. Part of me wondered if I was being paranoid, if working night shifts was messing with my head and making me imagine problems that were not really there. But then my phone started doing this thing where it would randomly try to connect to a Bluetooth device I had never seen before. The name was just 2 letters and a number, VK47, and it would pop up in my available devices list at the strangest times. Always when I was home, always when I was in my bedroom. The first few times I saw it, I ignored it, figured it was someone else's speaker or headphones in a nearby apartment, except it only appeared when I was inside my room, never in the living room or kitchen, and definitely not when I was at work. One night after my shift around 8 in the morning, I was getting ready for bed and noticed that VK47 was showing as available again. I was curious, maybe stupidly so, and I tried to connect to it just to see what would happen. My phone immediately said connection failed, like whatever device it was had rejected the pairing request. I sat there staring at my screen, and then it hit me. V and K were Vincent's initials. Vincent Kowalski, I remembered from the lease papers I had signed. My stomach twisted. Why would his device only show up when I was in my bedroom? And why would it be discoverable at all if he was not trying to connect to something? I did not confront him right away. Instead, I started paying closer attention to everything. The smart bulb in my bedroom had this tiny LED indicator light on the base, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, and I started noticing that sometimes it had this faint red glow instead of the normal white standby color. It was subtle, easy to miss, and it only happened during certain hours, specifically the hours I was supposed to be asleep. I tested it one day, pretended to go to bed at my usual time after a shift, lights off, door closed. But I stayed awake watching that bulb from under my covers. Around 30 minutes after I turned everything off, that little indicator shifted from white to red. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my phone and opened the smart bulb app, checked every setting I could find, but there was nothing that explained the color change. The app showed the bulb as off, inactive, not recording any activity, but that red light was definitely there, barely visible in the darkness, like a tiny eye watching me. I got up, unscrewed the bulb from the fixture, and examined it under my desk lamp. That was when I saw it, a seam in the plastic casing that did not look factory standard, almost like the bulb had been opened and reassembled. My hands were trembling as I grabbed a small screwdriver from my desk drawer and carefully pried the casing apart. Inside, nestled between the LED components and the circuit board, was a tiny camera module. It was smaller than my thumbnail, with a pinhole lens pointing directly outward, exactly where the bulb would have been facing my bed when screwed into the ceiling fixture. There were wires soldered onto the existing circuitry, clearly added after manufacturing, and a micro SD card slot on the side of the camera unit. I felt like I might throw up. This was not some malfunction or glitch or paranoia from working too many nights in a row. Vincent had physically modified this bulb, put a camera inside it, and installed it in my bedroom. He had watched me get ready for bed, watched me sleep, recorded God knows how many hours of footage without my knowledge or consent. The red indicator light was probably the recording status, active only during the hours when he knew I would be unconscious and vulnerable. My entire body went cold, then hot, then cold again. I wanted to scream, to march into his room and throw the dismantled bulb in his face, but I forced myself to think clearly. If I confronted him now, what would stop him from deleting evidence, from claiming I was crazy, from making this situation even more dangerous? Instead, I took photos of everything. The camera module, the wiring, the SD card slot, the modified casing. I used my phone to document every angle, making sure the images were clear and detailed. Then I carefully reassembled the bulb, screwed it back into the fixture, and left my bedroom exactly as it had been. My shift started in 6 hours, but there was no way I could sleep now. I sat on my bed, door locked, trying to figure out what to do next. Calling the police felt like the obvious choice, but I had no idea what kind of evidence they would need, or how long an investigation might take. I thought about my lease, about the fact that my name was on legal documents tied to this apartment and this man. I thought about Vincent coming home from work, realizing I had discovered his camera, and what he might do if he felt cornered. Every sound in the apartment made me jump. The refrigerator humming, the air conditioning kicking on, footsteps from the unit above. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard his keys in the front door. He was home early. I stayed in my room, heart hammering, listening to him move around the living room, heard him call out asking if I was awake. I did not answer. After a few minutes, his footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I watched the doorknob, half expecting it to turn even though I had locked it. He knocked, soft and polite, asked if everything was okay. I forced my voice to sound normal, said I was just tired and trying to sleep before work. He said okay, told me to let him know if I needed anything, and walked away. I waited until I heard his bedroom door close before I moved. My shift was not for another few hours, but I called my supervisor and said I had a family emergency, needed to leave town immediately. She was understanding, told me to take care of myself and let her know when I could come back. Then I called my friend Jessica, the one whose couch I had been sleeping on before this nightmare, and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. She heard something in my voice and did not ask questions, just said to come over whenever. I packed a bag as quietly as possible, just essentials and my laptop, and then I sat down and drafted an email to the apartment management company. I attached all the photos of the camera, explained the situation in detail, said I felt unsafe and needed to terminate my lease immediately due to the illegal surveillance. I copied a tenant rights organization on the email and sent it from my phone. Then I texted Vincent, kept it simple and cold, said something came up with my family and I had to leave for a while, would be back for my stuff later. I did not wait for his response. I grabbed my bag, unlocked my door as quietly as I could, and walked straight out of that apartment without looking back. Jessica's place was across town, and the entire drive I kept checking my rearview mirror, half convinced Vincent would somehow follow me. When I finally got there and told her everything, she wanted to call the cops immediately, but I explained that I had already contacted the management company and wanted to see how they handled it first. That night, I got a response from the property manager. They were horrified, apologetic, said they were launching an immediate investigation and would be entering the unit the next day with police present to document everything. They assured me I would not be held responsible for breaking the lease and offered to help me retrieve my belongings with an escort. Vincent sent me several texts that evening, first asking if everything was okay with my family, then asking when I would be back, then getting more insistent saying we needed to talk about the apartment and some issues with the Wi-Fi. I did not respond to any of them. The next afternoon, the property manager called me. They had entered the unit with 2 police officers and found exactly what I had described. Vincent had been there when they arrived, and according to the manager, he initially tried to claim the camera was for security purposes, that he was worried about break-ins. The officers were not buying it. They confiscated the bulb, his laptop, and several other devices as evidence. 2 days later, a detective contacted me to give a formal statement. She was patient and professional, walked me through everything that had happened from the day I moved in. Turned out Vincent had done this before, not in that specific apartment, but in a previous living situation about 3 years earlier in San Antonio. That case had been settled quietly, some kind of plea deal that kept it off his record in exchange for counseling and probation. The detective told me that this time, with the physical evidence and my documentation, they had enough to charge him with illegal surveillance and potentially stalking. The SD card in the camera had over 40 hours of footage, all of it recorded during my sleep hours, all of it focused on my bed. She did not go into detail about what was on the recordings, and I did not ask because I genuinely did not want to know. Vincent was arrested and released on bail, but he was not allowed to return to the apartment. The management company formally evicted him and changed all the locks. They offered to let me move into a different unit in the building at no cost, but I could not imagine staying there, could not imagine walking past that building ever again without feeling sick. I ended up finding a studio apartment on the other side of town, more expensive than I wanted but worth it for the peace of mind. It took me weeks to feel comfortable sleeping in my own space again. I would wake up multiple times during the day, convinced I heard something, convinced someone was watching. I checked every light fixture, every outlet, every smoke detector for hidden cameras. Jessica stayed with me the first few nights, and honestly, I do not know what I would have done without her. Vincent tried to contact me once through a restricted number, left a voicemail saying he wanted to explain, that I had misunderstood the situation, that he never meant to hurt me. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to the detective. His trial is set for next year, and I will have to testify, which I am dreading but also determined to do. The apartment complex settled with me out of court for failing to properly screen their tenants, which helped cover my moving costs and therapy bills. I still work night shifts at the hospital, still come home exhausted, but now I live alone and I keep my phone next to me at all times. I do not use smart bulbs anymore, do not have any smart devices in my apartment at all. Every single light is analog, every lock is manual, and I check them all twice before I try to sleep. People ask me sometimes why I'm so paranoid about technology now, and I just tell them I prefer to keep things simple. I do not usually share the full story because it feels too invasive, too violating, like giving away pieces of an experience that already took too much from me. But I wanted to post this here because if anyone else ever feels like something is off with their roommate, with their living situation, with devices that do not act right, trust that feeling. Document everything. Get out safely. You are not paranoid, and you are not imagining things. Sometimes the danger is real, and it is living right down the hall. I moved into that condo during a time when my life felt strangely quiet, the kind of stretch where you're juggling work, bills, and a vague hope that things will eventually feel stable again. The place had 2 bedrooms, a small shared kitchen, and a long balcony that wrapped across both rooms. The leasing agent told me the current tenant, a woman named Erin, preferred to keep to herself and barely interacted with anyone. That honestly sounded perfect to me. I wasn't looking for a new best friend, just peace. On my first day there, she greeted me with a brief nod. Not rude, just distant. Almost like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. Her room stayed dim, the curtains always drawn, and she kept her door slightly cracked but never fully open. I took it as her way of signaling boundaries, and I respected that. For the first couple of days, everything seemed normal enough. Things started to feel strange about a week in, though not in a way that immediately set off alarms. I'd come home from work and notice my yogurt missing, or a half-eaten granola bar inside the box I hadn't touched yet. I'm not messy, so when containers were put back in the wrong spot or a jar had fingerprint smudges I didn't leave, it stood out. I chalked it up to misremembering because I didn't want to confront a roommate over something small, but the pattern kept repeating. Even the toothpaste I'd just bought seemed to get lighter each morning. At first I wondered if Erin simply didn't realize she was using my stuff, but the thought felt too convenient. Every time I tried knocking on her door to talk, she answered in this soft, quiet voice, as if she were standing far from the door, telling me she preferred keeping routines separate. The nights were the part that slowly started messing with my head. I'd lie in bed around midnight and hear footsteps moving across the living room. Slow, deliberate steps. Not the kind of pacing you hear when someone's restless. The weird part was always the same. Erin's bedroom light stayed completely dark. There was no glow, no flicker of a phone screen, no shadow passing under her door. I'd listen as the steps moved from the kitchen toward the hallway, then stop for a moment near my door, like someone was standing there deciding whether to knock. Sometimes I'd hear the faintest sound, almost like breathing drawing in sharply, then nothing. Silence, thick and immediate. When I'd check the next morning, the apartment would look untouched, like the night hadn't happened. The balcony became a place I avoided without even realizing it. Both bedrooms had sliding doors that opened onto the same long stretch of concrete railing, with only a thin divider between our sides. I kept my curtains closed most nights because I didn't like seeing my own reflection in the glass, but occasionally I'd catch a glimpse of movement outside when I walked past. It wasn't clear enough to identify, just a shift, like fabric catching a breeze. One evening after hearing the footsteps again, I noticed that my sliding door lock wasn't sitting flush like it usually did. It was slightly tilted, almost as if someone had pushed it up just enough for it to reset in a different position. I remember staring at it, telling myself it must have gotten loose somehow, but the thought didn't stick. Something wasn't adding up, and I could feel it settling into my chest in a way that wouldn't let me shrug it off anymore. The turning point came late one evening after a long shift at work. I got home around 10, and the condo felt unusually warm and still, like the air hadn't moved in hours. Erin's door was closed, no light seeping from the bottom, and the place looked exactly the way I'd left it. I tossed my bag onto my bed and went to shower, letting the hot water clear my head. When I came back into my room, the faint scent of citrus hit me, the kind from my cleaning spray that I hadn't used in days. My desk chair, which I always tuck in, was pushed back just enough to look wrong. I stood there for a full minute, trying to decide if I was imagining it, or if someone had actually been in my room while I was gone. The idea felt too intimate, too specific to be a misunderstanding, and it stayed with me the rest of the night. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again, but this time they didn't move through the apartment. They came from outside, slow shuffling against the balcony floor, a rhythm too controlled to be the wind. I sat up in bed holding my breath so I could catch the faintest details. Something brushed the railing, a light scrape, followed by a soft thump, like someone leaning their weight against the divider between our rooms. I stared at the curtains, waiting for a shadow or a sign of movement, but the fabric stayed still. The only thing that shifted was the lock on my sliding door, rattling once, barely audible but impossible to miss. My heartbeat picked up in that uncomfortable pulsing way that makes your jaw clench. I knew in my gut the noise wasn't part of some harmless coincidence. I thought about waking Erin, but every interaction with her had been so strangely muted that the idea didn't sit right. She kept to herself in a way that felt less like shyness, and more like she was hiding in plain sight. Earlier that week, I'd knocked to ask if she wanted me to cover part of the electric bill, and she answered from behind the door, as if she didn't want me to see how close she was standing. Her voice always held this flat tone, steady and oddly practiced, like she was trying not to reveal anything real about herself. The memory replayed in my head as I listened to the balcony noises grow quieter. I waited, tense and alert, until the sounds faded completely, leaving the night feeling too empty, too staged. Once the quiet settled, I decided I couldn't go another minute without checking the balcony for myself. Every instinct told me not to open that sliding door, but the need to confirm what I suspected outweighed the fear. I pulled back the curtain slowly, just enough to peek through. The balcony was empty, but something about the scene felt wrong. Items out of place, small details that betrayed recent activity. The outdoor chair near the corner had been shifted toward my side, and the doormat I kept perfectly aligned with the frame had been nudged slightly sideways. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make my pulse throb in my ears. Someone had been out there, and they'd been close enough to touch the glass without me knowing. I stepped onto the balcony with my phone flashlight pointed downward, trying not to draw attention in case anyone was still nearby. The concrete felt cool under my feet, and the night air carried this faint metallic smell, like rain that never actually arrived. As I inched toward the divider, something caught my eye. Tiny scratch marks right near the bottom corner of my sliding door. They weren't random scuffs from moving furniture. They were straight, deliberate lines, like someone had been working at the lock with something thin. When I crouched down to look closer, I found a small piece of black rubber wedged beside the frame, the kind that looked like it belonged to the sole of a shoe. That was the moment everything clicked. Erin wasn't just quiet. She had been entering my room when I wasn't home. My mind raced through every odd detail I had brushed aside. The missing food, the rearranged items, the night footsteps. None of it felt harmless anymore. I backed away from the door, trying to keep my breathing steady as I re-entered my room. I locked the sliding door firmly, then rechecked the front door just to be sure. Part of me wanted to confront her right then, knock on her door and demand answers. But instincts told me that direct confrontation in the middle of the night wasn't a good idea. If she had been sneaking into my room for who knows how long, there was no telling how she'd respond if cornered. I texted a friend to let them know something seriously strange was going on, more for the comfort of knowing someone else was aware than anything else. Sleep didn't come. I lay awake listening to every sound, every creak, waiting for the slightest hint that she might try the balcony door again. The hours dragged until the sky finally started to lighten. Once the sun was fully up, I grabbed my bag, documents, and a handful of essentials. When I passed Erin's door on the way out, I noticed a thin line of light glowing from underneath it for the first time since I moved in. It flickered faintly, like she was pacing just out of view. That was enough to make me walk faster. I called the condo management from the parking lot and explained everything in blunt, nervous bursts. They told me to meet them with the police so they could legally access the unit and speak with her. When the officers arrived and entered the condo with management, Erin didn't answer her door. They had to unlock it with a master key. What they found wasn't violent or dramatic, just unsettling. Her room was almost completely empty, except for a mattress on the floor and a stack of notebooks lined neatly against the wall. No decorations, no clothes hung up, no signs of a normal routine. The sliding door to the balcony on her side had the same scratch marks as mine, only deeper, like she'd practiced on her own door first. The police questioned her when they located her later that afternoon, but she didn't give any explanations. She just said she liked access, whatever that meant. I moved out that same day, and to this day I still think about those nights, wondering how many times she walked into my room without me ever knowing. The year I moved into that old split-up house, I felt like I was finally catching a break after months of bouncing between expensive rentals. The place sat on a quiet street with tall maples leaning over the sidewalk, and the kind of front porch that creaked even when no one stepped on it. The owner, a soft-spoken older man named Gerald, showed me the room upstairs and made a point of saying the basement belonged to a relative who worked nights. He said it so casually that I didn't think twice about it at the time. My days back then were filled with long shifts at a cafe, and I just wanted somewhere cheap where I could sleep without thinking too hard. That first week felt surprisingly peaceful. I'd come home late, drop my backpack on the old chair by the window and listen to the ambient hum of the house settling. It was the kind of building where every small noise had an echo. Pipes clicking, wood expanding, the wind nudging the gutters. But occasionally, especially near midnight, I'd hear something that didn't match the rhythm of an aging house. A soft step on the basement stairs or the faint rustle of someone shifting their weight just behind the door at the landing. The first time it happened, I paused halfway through brushing my teeth, unsure if I'd imagined it. I tried brushing it off as the mysterious night shift relative coming or going. Still, what bothered me was how I never once heard the basement door open or close. The movement always felt like it came from deeper inside, as if someone was pacing slowly up and down the steps but never committing to climbing all the way up. Sometimes a shape would flicker across the stairwell wall when I walked past, like someone had just repositioned themselves in the dim light below. I'd lean over the railing, expecting to hear a voice or at least see a glimpse of someone heading down, but it always rounded back to silence. A couple weeks in, the house started giving me more reasons to pay attention. My grocery bags came a little lighter than I remembered packing them, and delivery orders never arrived, even though the app insisted they had. At first, I chalked it up to drivers leaving food at the wrong house. But then packages disappeared from the porch, small things I'd ordered online, nothing special, but enough to make me second-guess myself. One evening, after another missing delivery, I decided to get one of those cheap plug-in cameras people use as doorbells. I wasn't expecting much from it. I just wanted proof that my stuff wasn't magically vanishing into thin air. The camera was tiny, barely bigger than a key fob, but the live feed worked better than I expected. I pointed it toward the porch, angled enough to catch the basement door at the side of the house. That same night, while I sat on my bed folding my uniform shirt, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I figured it was a raccoon or maybe a late delivery driver turning around, but when I opened the feed, I saw someone walking straight toward the basement door. The porch light barely reached that part of the house, so the person looked more like a shifting outline than anything else. Still, what caught my attention was the way they moved, steady, deliberate, like they knew exactly where they were going. Curiosity pushed me to turn up the phone brightness and squint. The stranger wasn't Gerald, and definitely not anyone I'd seen entering the house before. They wore a hood pulled low and carried something small in their right hand. A second later, they slipped a key into the basement lock and eased the door open. Not once did they look around, which made the whole thing feel rehearsed. The door shut behind them without a slam, just a muted click that I wouldn't have heard without the camera's mic. I waited for them to come back out, expecting the alert to go off again, but an hour passed with nothing. The next morning, I tried bringing it up casually with Gerald while he watered the plants near the driveway. He kept his attention on the soil, answering in short, clipped phrases, acting like he had somewhere to be. When I mentioned someone using a key to get into the basement, he stopped moving entirely. I watched him press his thumb into the dirt a little too hard before muttering something about a cousin stopping by. The explanation didn't really fit, especially since he avoided eye contact the rest of the conversation. When I headed inside, I caught a glimpse of the basement door again, and for the first time, I noticed deep scratches around the handle, light, uneven claw-like marks I hadn't seen before. That night is when everything spiraled. My shift ended early, and I got home before sunset, hoping the extra daylight would make the house feel less eerie. I warmed some leftover pasta, sat at the little desk in my room, and tried to relax, but the camera kept popping in my mind. Eventually, I opened the feed, expecting nothing but an empty porch. Instead, the screen showed movement near the basement door again. It was the same hooded stranger, but this time, instead of heading straight inside, they stood still for several seconds, facing the house. Not toward the street, toward my bedroom window upstairs. Watching that figure stare toward my window sent a rush of heat through my chest. I leaned back instinctively, even though I knew they couldn't see me from that angle. The stranger shifted slightly, as if listening to something only they could hear, then turned and unlocked the basement door again. Before stepping inside, they paused and lifted their head just a little, almost like they were checking the second floor for movement. The camera mic picked up a faint scraping noise, metal brushing metal, right before the door closed behind them. I sat there for a long moment, unsure what to do, until the porch camera flashed a second alert. The alert wasn't from the basement door this time. It was from the walkway leading to the backyard. Someone else was back there, moving with a different gait, quicker and less careful. I tapped into the feed and saw Gerald walking with a flashlight, sweeping it across the fence as if he were searching for something. He didn't look toward the basement once. He didn't even seem aware someone had entered minutes earlier. His flashlight beam jerked around like he was looking for an animal that escaped. When he finally headed inside through the kitchen door, everything went still again. I sat with my phone in my hand, debating whether to call someone or pretend I hadn't seen any of it. Whatever courage I had left pushed me downstairs. I kept the phone in recording mode, not to document anything, but because holding it made me feel less alone. The house was quiet except for a faint rhythmic thump coming from the basement, like someone shifting boxes or dragging something across the concrete floor. When I reached the landing, the air had a heavy, earthy smell, mixed with something metallic that clung unpleasantly in the back of my throat. I stood there, listening, telling myself I'd knock once and then run back to my room if anything answered. But before I raised my hand, the sound stopped completely. Not gradually, instantly. As if whoever was down there had been listening for me the entire time. That was enough. I went back upstairs, grabbed my backpack, and left the house without turning off the lights. I stayed at a friend's place that night and returned the next morning with her and her brother so I wouldn't have to enter alone. When we arrived, the porch looked exactly the same, except the basement door was wide open. No sign of forced entry, no sign of Gerald. The inside of the basement smelled like dirt and old fabric, but it was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no tools, not even dust patterns where boxes might have been. Just a bare concrete room with a single key left in the middle of the floor. I packed the rest of my things in under 15 minutes and never stepped inside that house again. I still don't know who that person was or why they had access to the basement, but I haven't ordered a single delivery to my home since.